Welcome to the Food Junkies podcast. Here, we aim to bring you the experience, strength, and hope of professionals working on the front lines in the field of food addiction. Our mission is to educate you, the listener, and increase overall awareness about food addiction as a recognized disorder. Here, we discuss all things recovery, exploring the many pathways people take towards abstinence in order to achieve a health-forward lifestyle. We hope to inspire you to thrive rather than just survive. So stay positive, make a change for yourself, and share your journey with others. And hopefully the message will spread.
Is there a fat switch built into our genes, suggesting that nature actually wants us to be fat? And what does this mean for food addicts? Welcome to the Food Junkies podcast. My name is Dr. Vera Tarman, and I am your host today, speaking with Dr. Richard Johnson, Professor Emeritus at the University of Colorado. Dr. Johnson received his medical degree from the University of Minnesota. Then he completed his residency in internal medicine and fellowships in nephrology and infectious diseases at the University of Washington. As former chief of the Division of Renal Diseases and Hypertension, he's published over 700 scientific papers and authored 3 books: The Sugar Fix, The Fat Switch, and Nature Wants Us to Be Fat. We at Food Junkies are especially interested in his research that focuses on how sugar, particularly fructose, drives kidney disease, diabetes, and especially obesity. Welcome, Dr. Johnson.
Yeah, thank you for having me on your show. Thank you for the very nice introduction.
So please tell us what got you interested in nephrology?
Yes. Okay. So I always had an interest actually in infectious disease. I had this part of me that wanted to be like Indiana Jones and travel throughout the world and see exotic infections and make great diagnoses and help people this way. And then I particularly had an interest in tropical medicine. And then when I went to during my residency in general medicine, I ended up covering kidney disease, the kidney disease ward for 2 months through all of November and December without any other people to help me. So I was pretty much on service every day and every night. And it was quite a brutal period. But during that time, I spent a lot of time on the wards. In fact, I occasionally slept there just because I would work pretty late. And I became intrigued with kidney disease as a specialty, and I became very close to patients with kidney disease. And I changed my mind, decided to study both infectious disease and kidney disease. There was also a very famous person there named Belding Scribner at the time who was nominated for the Nobel Prize because he's the one that started dialysis, and he was quite an amazing character, a wonderful mentor. And there was another mentor there, Bill Kauser, who I got to know as well. And so between those two, it was enough to make me want to become a kidney specialist. I then went on to become a kidney and infectious disease specialist, but I became interested in what causes high blood pressure, because high blood pressure is very much linked with salt and the kidneys. And it's thought that the kidneys have trouble to excrete salt as the cause of hypertension, and no one knew what the mechanism was. And I spent about 10, 15 years trying to figure out how the kidney, what was the cause of high blood pressure. And we actually did identify a pathway that is probably the most respected pathway for what causes high blood pressure. And it was related to changes that are acquired in the kidney that affect its ability to excrete salt. And when we were looking at that, then we were wondering what was driving it. And there was a substance called uric acid that seemed to be important. And uric acid is associated with a disease called gout, but it's also driven up by diet. Sugar drives it up, and high purine foods drive it up. And we found that uric acid had a very important role in causing those changes in the kidney that led to high blood pressure. And so we published that, and we actually showed some of the earliest evidence, true evidence, that uric acid might have a role in blood pressure. And we even did a study that we published in the JAMA and uric acid or gout is very common among food junkies. And then the question came, moved to Baylor and then to the University of Florida, where I was chief both places. And while I was there, I became very intrigued with what caused the uric acid to go up. And I had a conversation with Gary Taubes one day, and we talked about sugar as a cause. And so I thought about it more and thought maybe that could be playing a role in high blood pressure. And so we gave sugar to animals, and of course they developed high blood pressure. They developed a high uric acid. And then we lowered the uric acid and their blood pressure came down. But the surprising finding was that we also improved their obesity and their diabetes and all these things. And that was really an alarming finding. That paper's been quoted now over 1,000 times, maybe 2,000 times. It had a very powerful finding because when we blocked it, we weren't blocking the calories of sugar. We were blocking an enzymatic pathway activated by sugar. So it had nothing to do with calories. And this was 2004, when everyone was saying that it was calories that was driving obesity. And the other thing was the sugar industry was actively telling people, and it was like over the internet and the papers, even major professors were saying, hey, you know what? Sugar is just a calorie. It's not necessarily a nutritious calorie, but it's only a calorie. Don't worry about it. It's just a calorie. And if you cut back your calories, you are going to be fine. That was what they wrote. And here we had it, that sugar was causing diabetes and obesity and high blood pressure, and it wasn't through its calories. This was the first proof that came from us, 2004. Took 20 years for the world to accept it. The other day, I went to the grocery store, and I like sugar-free, low sugar fruit drinks that are low sugar, like Bay and other drinks that actually don't have fructose in it, even from fruit, but it's these drinks. And I walked down this aisle, and there's like 500 different products that are all saying no sugar. That was not the case 5 years ago. It was not the case. So the world is beginning to understand that sugar's bad. And I think there are very few people that really think sugar's healthy. When we started studying this, we discovered that there was a component of sugar called fructose that was the responsible candidate.
Yeah, I'm ask you what the mechanism was about this connection.
Yeah. So you want me to talk about fructose? So sugar.
Well, fructose and then also uric acid, because you introduced it.
Yeah. So sugar contains glucose and fructose, and they're bound together. And there's also this syrup called high-fructose corn syrup.
Yeah.
Tastes fantastic, right? People love the taste. We have sweet receptors in our tongue. And when we eat sugar, we get a dopamine response in the brain. It's like a pleasure response, and we crave it. And also we crave salt. And a lot of people love salty foods. And if you mix salt and sugar in that like special, what they call kettle corn, it's just, people love it. And also we like this flavor called umami. And umami is this beautiful taste they put it in monosodium glutamate, which sounds like a poison, but people love the taste. And so you put it in your nachos and in your Doritos, and you add it to food, and the food industry knows that you like it. And so you have these taste receptors that make you seek this junky food, this food junky food. And it's all these taste receptors that then activate a neural connection to the brain to cause dopamine. And so it was thought that maybe this was meant to help people evolutionary to find foods that contain a lot of calories and could help us. So that was the kind of original thinking. But what we found is that really the cause of all this is a substance called fructose. And fructose stimulates hunger and the desire to eat food and all that through its metabolism, not through its not just through its taste. And we found that, for example, there was a few years, maybe 10 years ago, a group found that if you took an animal and you knocked out the sweet receptors so they can't taste sweet, you still like sugar. Animals will seek sugar even when they can't taste it, because the metabolism of sugar, it's the metabolism, is what activates the desire to eat and the desire to find that food. So you can take two drinks, one with sugar and one just with water, and a mouse that has its sweet receptors knocked out can't taste the difference, but it will seek the difference. It seeks the sugar anyway, and it will get fat from the sugar. And we did studies where we knocked out all the taste receptors, the umami, the sweet, just in the tongue. And when we did that, the mice still umami and sugar and salt, but it's because of they're metabolizing, they're making fructose in their body. So what's interesting is all three of those foods that we like, the commonality is that they stimulate fructose production. And even glucose, which is in sugar but is not fructose, that can be converted to fructose in your body.
Can you explain that? I found that intriguing, that even without intaking fructose, our body will make it. Why would that?
Right. Yeah. So I have an anthropology side to me. That's when I was in college, I very much was interested in nature and evolution. And I was intrigued with why some animals purposefully become fat at certain times of the year. And like hibernating animals, of course, will get fat before winter and they'll live off their fat. And animals like the lemur in Madagascar gets this really fat tail. And then when the dry season comes and it's really hot and there's no water or food around, they'll hibernate in the summer. It's called estivation. They find a hollow in a tree, they go in there and they sleep for 3 months. And many animals do it. And many animals carry fat for times when there's no food around. Like a camel carries a hump, and when it can't find water, it will break down the fat. And when you break down fat, you make calories, but you also make water. And all these animals that live in the desert tend to carry fat, but they can't carry it on their body or they would insulate them and they would overheat. So they put it in their tails and they put it in a hump on the neck or a hump on the back. The Bactrian camel has two. And so these are fat, but that don't contain water, but when they're broken down, they make water. So fat has this really critical survival tool. And it turns out that you don't have to hibernate. Orangutans in Southeast Asia will eat a lot of fruit, actually, during the fruit season, the wet season. And then during the dry season, they live off much of their fat. They'll eat a few twigs and leaves, but there's not much around. So the fat, they use it for that time of year. And some animals, like the whale, doesn't drink fresh water. So it gets a lot of its water from its fat. And it also uses it to insulate itself so it can dive. Anyway, so there's this interesting story that fat can be a survival tool. And the question is, how do the animals get the fat? And it turns out that when an animal is stressed, it will start to convert glucose to fructose. And it's really stress. And you can define stress in different ways. So for example, if you take an animal like a naked mole rat, and it lives in these burrows in South Africa. And in those burrows, the oxygen content can go down. It can be very low. And like a normal animal can't survive down there because there's too little oxygen. That's stress. And what happens is that activates a process to generate fructose. And then the fructose can make fat, but it also, fructose will switch metabolism from the mitochondria to glycolysis. So we make energy through our mitochondria, but those mitochondria use oxygen to make energy. So that's why we breathe oxygen we need oxygen to keep our energy production high. But under low oxygen conditions, you can make some energy without mitochondria. And it's called glycolysis. And cancer cells like glycolysis. And what fructose does is when you make it, it actually shifts the mitochondria from making energy and to glycolysis. And to make energy, mitochondria use a lot of calories. So instead of the calories going to make energy, the calories get stored as fat. So it's this brilliant system. You reduce your metabolism because you're not making so much energy. So you become a slug. And the food you eat is used to make fat. And you switch to a system that allows you to survive under low oxygen conditions because that's a stressful situation.
Can I ask you here, when I think translating that to human beings, when we eat too much fructose, we get fat, but it's visceral obesity. It's not subcutaneous. So are you saying there's actually an evolutionary role for visceral obesity?
Yes.
Which I've always just assumed was negative.
No, absolutely. Visceral obesity is used as a protective mechanism for animals.
Oh, wow. So there's actually
absolutely.
a value to it.
Yes, there's a value to it.
Okay.
It was a great move to be able to store fat before winter. It's absolutely evident that would be a good move.
But I always understood that to be subcutaneous obesity, but you're saying it's both.
It's both, but actually the visceral obesity is more efficient at providing.
Wow.
You can build it up more. Yeah.
Okay.
Glucose tends to make subcutaneous obesity.
Okay.
But it will not cause diabetes or insulin resistance if it's just strictly if you block the fructose sites. So another way to make fructose is to give glucose to it. So when you give glucose to an animal, the excess glucose raises the osmolality. I'm sorry, that's a complicated thing, but basically as the sugar goes up in your blood, it says there's not enough water around because you'll get thirsty. And salt does the same. It raises the osmolality. So when you eat salt, it's really evident you become thirsty. And that thirst says, hey, I want to turn on systems that will hold on to water. And so making fat becomes one of those mechanisms. And because it doesn't actually physically hold on to water, but the fat will produce water when you burn it.
So hold on. I know you have the dehydration hypothesis as being a contributor to obesity, but even eating salt, you're saying, in this mechanism.
Oh, that's much more powerful than dehydration.
Yeah. So
salt is absolute. Yes. And when you eat salt, you start making fructose.
Yeah.
And you make it in your liver and your uric acid goes up too. I haven't actually talked about how it works, but the basic premise is that it turns out that nature over millions of years tried to develop a system to protect animals before there was a crisis. In other words, it's terrible to suddenly be starving with no food around. You can activate blood pressure and all these things, but it's a short-term survival mechanism because if there's no food around and you don't have a sufficient stores, you're going to die. So animals develop systems to alarm them when they need to increase their fat stores. And some of those things are stress. So for example, if you eat salt, your osmolality goes up in your blood. It makes you thirsty. You've got not enough water. It says, hey, I don't have enough water. I'm going to drink as much as I can. But if I can store fat, I'm going to have another source of water.
Yeah.
Here's another one. If you're animals that have a low blood pressure because there's not enough salt and food around, they're going to try to activate this process as well, because part of the survival mechanism includes not just storing fat, but raising your blood pressure. Insulin resistance is also a protective mechanism. So a lot of the brain uses glucose as its main fuel. Not all, but a lot. And And what I should say is insulin is used to help move glucose into tissue, but because the brain is so important, a lot of the brain doesn't require insulin. So it will help, even if you're diabetic, there's going to be some glucose to help you. And you don't necessarily need insulin, at least short term. And so what happens is, to protect an animal, if the animal thinks there's going to be no food around, it wants to have enough glucose so that it can think okay. Because you can have all the fuel in the world, but if your brain isn't working, you're a dead duck. The brain is critical for survival to help avoid predators, to help fight predators, etc. The brain is critical. So what insulin resistance turns out to be a protective mechanism, because when there's not enough fuel around, you want to route the glucose more to the brain than to the muscle. Yes, you want to get some in the muscle.
Yeah.
The muscle requires insulin to get the glucose in. So if you make the muscles resistant to glucose, the glucose will go up, levels will go up in the blood, even if there's not less glucose overall, because the muscle's not using it. That reduces the metabolism, which reduces your energy needs. So you don't need as much food because the muscles aren't using as much.
Yeah.
And at the same time, the glucose goes up in the blood that helps the brain. So insulin resistance occurs with every animal when they hibernate or long distance migration. All those animals will raise their glucose levels as a protective mechanism.
Yeah, I remember reading, I think you said insects even become insulin resistant.
Oh, yeah.
But there must be a sweet spot, because insulin resistance can also contribute to dementia. So there must be a sweet spot about how much insulin resistance is favorable to the brain.
Oh, absolutely. In all these animals that hibernate and so forth, these processes are activated only at a time when they need it, like right before winter, like right before the dry season. And then when you're hibernating, you burn the fat, you burn the glucose, and everything gets better. A hummingbird will drink nectar, and it will become insulin resistant, fatty liver, and become even diabetic during the day when it's eating all that sugar. But because it has this super high metabolism, it will burn it off during the night. So it is a very interesting thing. But what we do know is that if you make an animal insulin resistant and fat, and you don't stop eating, and what triggers it in the hibernating animals is that the food is no longer available. That's the key thing that shifts them from still storing fat to burning fat. So what happens is, they used to think it's the sun, it's changes in the weather, but really the key thing is when the food becomes less available, the animals will trigger going into torpor, and then they start burning the fat. There's some evidence from the old literature that humans might have a tendency to the same thing. There's this thing called loxy. Have you ever heard of it?
No.
Loxy. Yeah, so there's this one place in Siberia where
some form of hibernation.
The people were known to, when winter came, they would just sleep the entire winter away. And what they would do is they would sleep for like 24, 48 hours. And then they would wake up and just
sounds like an ideal vacation.
eat something next to the bed and then fall back asleep. It's like the chipmunks that have their cache of nuts, and they'll wake up intermittently. But when they're sleeping, there's some evidence that they're dropping their metabolism more than classic sleep. And there's these reports from early 1900s of this practice.
So this explains why when you go on a restricted diet, your metabolism slows down. It's a kind of a form of hibernation.
Yes, exactly. It tries to trigger you. And there are all these other things. So like our group looked at how this works, and like when you fast, and especially if you cut out carbs, what happens is the system is so strong at making you want to get fat that if you start eating sugar, you'll start absorbing the sugar faster and metabolizing it faster. So the body loves the sugar, and it will upregulate the transporters in the gut so you absorb things faster, and it will metabolize it faster. And we did this study in children where we took kids who were overweight, normal kids, and kids who were overweight and had biopsy proven fatty liver at the age of 14. That's horrible, right?
Yeah.
And we gave them all a slug of sugar. Actually, we just gave them a slug of fructose, and we measured how much of fructose they absorbed. And the lean kids absorbed like half of the fructose.
Wow.
And the fat kids absorbed like 80%. And the fat kids with biopsy proven fatty liver, they absorbed it all. And this is all diet induced. Maybe there's some hereditary aspects, but usually you in animals, you can induce this by just putting them on sugar for 2 weeks. And if you take them off sugar, these transporters go down. So when you eat sugar, you increase the transporters, so you eat more sugar. So for example, let's say that you're a sugaraholic.
Yeah.
And you eat a lot of sugar, and now your transporters are so high that even small amounts of sugar, you're going to absorb it 100%, whereas maybe other people won't. So you're trapped, right? Because you're going to say, I'm going to cut out sugar, but there's a little bit of sugar here and there. So you're still going to get a fair amount of sugar because your transporters are screaming. So this guy Atkins, way back, developed this really cool idea that you should go on a carb restriction, severe carb restriction for 10 days or something before you go on the Atkins diet. I don't know if but a lot of people will do this kind of like severe carb restriction. And when you do that, these transporters come down, and now you're not going to be absorbing as much sugar for your exposure. And it's like rebooting the system. It's like cleaning the computer out and going back to where you should be. So this idea of doing a purge, intermittent fasting is good, but in our studies in animals, it's really 7 to 14 days of carb restriction to really take the system back to normal. But anyway, so the people on a keto diet, it's just a fantastic move because everything gets back to normal. We should now talk about fructose and how you make it. You make fructose only one way. It comes from glucose. Okay. Fructose, when you make it, you can eat it, right? Sugar has fructose, high fructose corn syrup has fructose. Probably the majority of the fructose we get day to day comes from actual dietary fructose. But your body can make fructose. And your body makes fructose from glucose. And when you eat salt, you trigger the enzyme to convert glucose to fructose. So there's really two things you have to have. You have to have the glucose available, and you have to have the enzyme that converts the glucose to fructose. And normally that enzyme is not around, but it gets turned on by sugar. Sugar amplifies by turning on that enzyme. It's turned on by when you eat high glycemic foods. So this was a real disappointment to me, but I knew that if you eat a lot of bread and potatoes and rice that don't contain fructose, but contain carbs and contain glucose, that can still make you fat. And so the big breakthrough was the experiment we did when I was at Denver early on with Miguel and Aspa, where we gave carbs to animals, just glucose, and they became fat. And everyone thought it was from insulin. And some fat is from insulin, especially the subcutaneous. But when we looked at it, when they were eating the glucose, they were making fructose. And the insulin resistance in the fatty liver were from the fructose being made. So if we blocked fructose, them making fructose, they could eat glucose. They gained weight, but it was much less. And they didn't get diabetes, and they didn't get hypertension, and they didn't get fatty liver.
This would explain why eating chips, for like potato chips, which are starch and salt and make you very dehydrated.
Yeah, and they put umami in it, and
Yeah.
umami is really the food to make uric acid. If you look at umami, all the components of umami are used to make uric acid, and uric acid is made when you metabolize fructose, you make uric acid, but then the uric acid feeds back to turn on the enzyme to make more fructose. So that it's a real tricky little bear. And so it turns out that the three tastes we like are all aimed to activate this pathway. And what's the main fuel is the carbs. The main fuel is the carbs. And if you go on a low carb diet, you really can't make much fructose. Even when the enzymes are turned on.
Okay.
And so the enzyme, if the enzyme's turned on, but you can't make fructose because you don't have enough glucose around, it's a winner. And it turns out that when you look at the big picture, sugar is the bad guy, but high glycemic carbs come in a close second. And when it comes to, there's another twist, and that is that high glycemic carbs raise the glucose in the blood. And so most of the things that cause fructose to go up, it's mainly in the liver. But when you raise glucose in the blood, you turn on fructose production in other places, like in the liver and in the islets of the pancreas that make insulin. And then once you start doing that, you can become permanently diabetic, because the insulin resistance is associated with a loss of insulin production as well. But the worst is in the brain. And our biggest breakthrough in the last maybe 3 years has been the recognition that fructose production in the brain is probably the primary cause of Alzheimer's. And the data, frankly, is overwhelming. And I would be happy to debate it with the world's most famous Alzheimer's experts, because many of them still don't recognize the key importance of diet, unbelievably. And they're in their own world. And so in this world where they're looking at amyloid plaques and all this stuff, and they're not thinking about the big picture. It's unbelievable, actually. And David Perlmutter and many others, we're well aware that this is an issue. Even I sent a letter to the Lancet, and they stopped the publication of it because, I don't know, it's just totally unbelievable, because it's science-based. The papers that support it are published in the top journals. It's not. But basically what happens is, if your listeners want to reduce the risk for dementia, cut back on sugar, okay? Number one, cut back on high fructose corn syrup, soft drinks, unbelievably associated with Alzheimer's, with shrinking brains, and just cut it out. And no soft drinks, okay? Just stop it. But high glycemic foods, pancakes, bread, chips are really bad, because or French fries. Think about it. The French fries have the carbs to convert to fructose. They have the salt, which turns on the enzyme. And then it's coated with grease, which is like fat. And what's incredible, and there's a seed oil theory you probably have heard about, but what's incredible is seed oil and fats are really bad when this pathway is activated, because when you activate this pathway, you get hungry, and you actually develop a specific liking for fatty foods. So our taste buds don't have tastes for fat, right? But when you activate the fructose pathway, the brain starts seeking high fat foods, because that's the best way to increase your caloric intake, the number of calories you eat, because 1 spoon of fat is 9 calories and 1 spoon of carb is 4 calories. So what becomes a calorie issue when you activate the switch, because you want to put on as much fat as possible. So the fructose makes you hungry, and the fat becomes the firewood or the fire that you just set.
Yeah. So all of this, what you've explained in this last half hour, was basically the fat switch, and how this fructose mechanism is the explanation for why nature essentially wants to make us fat. Survival. Yeah.
And then the biggest question that we haven't really talked about is, how does fructose do this? Why does one calorie do this and why do the other ones don't?
Yeah.
And again, I'm quite proud of our work in this area because we figured it out. And what it happens is that it's a chemistry issue, and as well as a biologic issue. And when fructose is metabolized, it actually drops the amount of ATP being produced, and it also consumes the ATP that is present. And this combination leads to a low ATP level in the cell and a suppression of the mitochondria, which, as we mentioned, is a good thing because it reduces the oxygen needs, it reduces the metabolism.
Yeah.
So it helps the animal gain weight. But most calories, when you eat them, are used to produce energy, right? We eat calories to produce energy, and fructose also can produce energy, but it resets the energy level in the cell to a lower level, and that excess energy that has to be present by the law of thermodynamics goes into stored energy, and stored energy is fat. And then the low ATP is a signal to the animal that their energy level's low, because the fructose blocks the sensing of how to convert the fat back to energy.
So the fatter you are, the fatter you're going to become.
Because when you start gaining that fat,
Yeah.
and your energy, your intracellular energy is low because it's all in stored fat instead of active energy, you're going to keep eating or you'll be hungry. And it's a horrible thing. So you can have these individuals who get overweight and they'll say, I'm not eating anything, but I'm still gaining weight.
Yeah.
How can that happen? And what's happening is they become so efficient at storing fat and at reducing their metabolism that it's like a trap. And what happens is, over time, there's a loss of mitochondria that kind of locks them in. So now they're in a low energy state that they can't even convert. But there's a fantastic way to regain your energy.
Yeah, please tell us, because what do you do in that situation?
Yeah.
We have a lot of people in that situation.
God, yes. So the first thing is, they try to force yourself to be active. And it's not, you're not becoming active to burn calories, because it's not going to work. You're trying to become active to stimulate the mitochondria to come back, and they can come back. So just begin by walk around the block. First step. Then walk around the block twice and try to walk. It turns out that walking can stimulate mitochondria, especially if you walk at a level where you have a little trouble talking. You can talk to the person walking with you, but it's a little bit, you're close to being a little bit short of breath. That's the level you want. And that will stimulate mitochondria. Now, that is the classic way. My friend Inigo San Millan, you should have him on your show. He is a coach, studies physiology, but he's a coach for a lot of the world's greatest athletes. And he's coached the Tour de France winners several times, and he knows how to improve mitochondria. He's like the world's best.
Okay, so that's one way.
Yeah, so exercise. The trouble is, as we get older and overweight, we can have knee problems and hip problems, and it can be harder to be mobile. So we like to have other ways to stimulate it. And there are a couple of foods that actually can stimulate mitochondria. And I'm involved with some of them, not all of them. So one that I'm not involved with is pomegranates contain a substance called urolithin, which actually improves mitochondria. We've shown it in animals or in cell culture. And it's a good substance. You can probably buy supplements like pomegranate powder or whatever. or you can just put pomegranates on. That they have some effect. Dark chocolate is a fantastic. It contains a substance called epicatechin. There was a guy named Norm Hollenberg who was at Harvard, who was curious why these Kuna Indians that live on the San Blas Islands off Panama never get fat and never had diabetes. And he went down there in the 70s with his group to find what gene they had that was protecting them from obesity. And turned out it wasn't a gene, because when these people went to Panama City, they would become fat very quickly. And the dietitian figured out that these guys are drinking like 10 cups of cocoa a day, bitter, unsweetened cocoa. And so they started studying it. And then my friend George Schreiner and Sandeep Dugar actually identified that dark chocolate contains a substance called epicatechin, and that stimulates mitochondria.
Wasn't the caffeine then?
It wasn't the caffeine.
No.
And then Sandeep started a company called Blue Oak that is selling his purified epicatechin. It's pretty expensive, but I'm on the scientific board, and we've just applied for the X Prize because it looks like it can block aging, right? Because by stimulating mitochondria. And it just got accepted as it got through the first stage. Yeah. And we're going to do a study in people to see if we can block aging with this. Yeah. It's very exciting.
Okay, but what about just pure and basic a keto diet or a carnivore diet?
Yes.
Wouldn't that
yes. So yes, I did a study with Magdalena Madero in Mexico City. She put people on a low salt and low carb diet, and just that alone could stimulate mitochondria. She got like a 40-fold increase at 30 days with a kind of a low carb, low salt diet. You know what? Eat healthy, exercise, get a little bit of dark chocolate, 70%. Don't get too much sugar in it. Caffeine is good, by the way. Caffeine has a lot of benefits as well, but maybe not so much on stimulating the mitochondria, but it has a lot of benefits. I know people wonder about that, but caffeine is actually associated with a reduced risk for diabetes.
Okay.
And gout.
What about somebody who wants to follow a whole food, plant-based diet? Is there hope or help?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Processed junk food.
Okay.
Is like the worst.
Right.
What you're promoting on your podcast is so important, because ultra processed food is basically fat, sugar, salt, amount of sodium glutamate, all added together. The food industry has figured out that if we put these foods that stimulate the activation of this pathway, people are going to seek it because it tastes good. It drives the dopamine response. Yeah. It's like a trap.
But whole foods like fruits, which have fructose in them, corn, which has fructose in it, is still okay.
Yes. So I did do a study. I'm sorry, I've published 700 papers. So it seems actually, to be honest, now it's 900. But anyway, I can tell you that natural fruit contains substances that block the fructose in it. Most of them, like kiwi, has this huge amount of vitamin C. Kiwi is fantastic fruit. Lemon and lime don't really have much sugar in it. A lot of them have, like oranges, they have some fructose and sugar in it for sure, but they have these other things that are really good that help block flavonols and stuff that help block it. Potassium helps block it. It's so the way evolution worked is when the fruits were forming, when they form, the tree doesn't want the fruit to be eaten early on because they want the seeds to germinate or to mature so that they can germinate and make a new tree. The fructose content goes up as the fruit ripens, and that makes the birds like it and so forth, and then they spread the seeds. It's actually a symbiotic relationship. Yeah. Humans tend to like fruit a little tartar than most other animals. And so we tend to eat it when it's still got a lot of vitamin C and other things, and the sugar content isn't mushy and ripe and oversweetened. Having said that, you can get into trouble with some fruits are very high in sugar. Figs.
Yeah. Dates.
Oh, figs and dates. Don't eat that.
Yeah.
That's so much sugar. That's how the chimpanzee puts fat on itself as it looks for fig trees.
Before we close off, can I get your comments on GLP-1s?
When they first were being studied, I thought, oh my God, it's an injection. It's super expensive. It's got all these side effects. You relapse as soon as you stop it. It was one of those things where you go, we can do better than this.
Uh-huh.
But what's happening is it's getting cheaper. They're developing oral forms. And they have this idea of taking it chronically, kind of like a blood pressure medicine. And what we're finding is it really does block this switch.
It blocks the switch as well.
Yes, it does to some extent. Absolutely. If you give it to an animal being fed fructose, it reduces the fructose intake. So it blocks how much you make, the metabolism, and so forth. Yeah. And I think it also seems to work on certain parts of the pathway. So I think I actually think it's going to be a great advance in science and in health. I don't want people to have to spend thousands and thousands of dollars, but it does seem like it helps. It's helping a lot of people.
Yeah.
We have to recognize that there's a big relapse rate. And I think that it's a great way to help people who are really overweight. And then, but it shouldn't replace eating healthy.
Right.
You know, what I think we should do is use it as a tool.
Yeah. That's kind of where
to help us, but make sure that we hold true to eating healthy foods, natural foods.
Yeah, you're developing your own fructose metabolic inhibitor. I think you were alluding to that a few minutes ago.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I do have one that I've been spending my life trying to do it. I think scientifically, if I do this thing where I had a big role in helping to figure this switch out, and then also can find a solution to block it.
Yeah.
It's like the dream of a scientist. Forget the money and all that. Just think of helping people. And so I've been working on this for a long time. We do have a partner. We have some very promising results, but it turns out it is really hard to block this enzyme. It's not so easy.
Yeah, because
if we do get this enzyme, I don't want it to mean that you can go out and eat all the bad food you want.
Yeah.
But I do think it could help a lot of people if we can get it to the clinic.
Are you getting close to that happening?
Yeah, we're getting close to that. We're getting close to being able to test it. Yeah. And it has some other advantages. It blocks alcoholism, for example, just
like the GLP-1s. Yeah. Okay.
That's why I'm pretty sure the GLP-1s are working in our pathway. Exactly how is actually a research project.
Okay, interesting. You are fascinating. Well, our time is pretty much up. Our last question, which is the signature question. If you could tell a younger version of yourself something about this fat switch or fructose, what would it be?
Wow, what I've learned in this world is that, first off, there's a great joy to doing research. I love being a physician and taking care of people. There's nothing that I can think of that beats helping someone with a serious problem, and you can help them. But when you do research, you have this potential to help more than one person if you can figure things out. And research is really fun. And what I've learned is that we should be thinking not just in terms of humans and mouse models and this, like what most researchers are doing, but we need to have nature's perspective, looking at this from a standpoint of nature, which has gone through evolution and millions of years of stuff, because nature knows best. And so when you start thinking about obesity as something that nature was intentionally wanting to help protect it, it was investigations along that line that led to our major insights that then we take back to the human and say, oh my God, we just overactivated this process and so that's what's going on. So I would say evolution and nature should be something that every researcher should think about when it comes to addressing health issues.
Yeah, and learn to work with it rather than against it.
Exactly.
Yeah. Thank you so much. What a fascinating conversation.
Thank you, Vera.
Thanks for joining us this week on Food Junkies Recovery from Food Addiction. Make sure to join our Facebook group, Sugar Free for Life Support Group. I'm Sweet Enough. Molly and Clarissa are food addiction professionals who offer one-to-one counseling and group coaching through Sweet Sobriety. Please subscribe to our show so you never miss an episode. While you're at it, if you found value in today's episode, we'd appreciate you leaving us a review on your favorite platform. Your feedback helps grow our show and allows us to reach others who need to hear this message of recovery. Don't forget to pick up a copy of Dr. Tarman's book, Food Junkies. And as Vera always says, the power is ours.